All right, we are back here at Kayhan TV Studios. The country finds itself in a somber mood after the atrocity that was the Las Vegas shooting. A lot of people I know who are not even close to the incident are still rattled. Friends, strangers, no matter where we were, it's impossible for this not to resonate powerfully with every human being in this great nation. But we are strong, and we will carry on. So it is with a heavy heart that we continue with our programming, but maybe it's a good time for at least a few minutes anyways to take our minds away from the tragedy and take a little sports break. So welcome. This is a Kayhan TV Sports Break. This week we focused on NFL, and I have a guest in the studio, Guru Durs, fantasy football expert. We met at the liquor store where I sometimes hang out and act like I'm working. We haven't gotten a chance yet to get to know each other, but thanks for coming on the show. I guess we'll get a chance to learn a bit about you right here. How are things going with you?
Everything's going fantastic. I can't complain, especially now that we're into October, which is my favorite sports month of the year. You got mid-season football going on, you got basketball season about to kick off, and you got playoff baseball. So what else could you ask for?
Yeah, that was a good game today that we just watched, Colorado and Arizona. Last night, I mean. So how about a few questions, though, about football? Because I brought you here just basically to see how your fantasy teams are doing. I know you're big into fantasy football. But, we're trying to get to know you a little bit. It's the first time you've been on the channel. So what do you watch football for? Is it the drama of a close game? Do you have a favorite team? Or are you just into the rush of the fantasy football competition?
Well, I've been a huge sports fan my whole life. The thing I like about fantasy football specifically is that it combines some of my favorite things like statistics, analysis, research, and then also just a love of sports in general, which is great. And it's a good opportunity to shoot the shit with your friends and dish a little beef back and forth in a very playful manner. And when it comes to football specifically, I'm most intrigued, I'd say, by the strategy involved in a game that is so team oriented, where you have so many moving pieces, and it's really kind of like 3D chess in a way. So I think it's pretty cool to see how the game has evolved and how fantasy football has become such a popular sort of subculture as far as sports fanhead is concerned.
And what about the team? You root for a team specifically?
Oh, so yeah, I was a Chargers fan my whole life until they just relocated to Los Angeles, and after living in Los Angeles for 11 years, but being a San Diego hometown guy, I had to jump ship because Dean Spanos was looking out for more of his personal interests than the interests of his fan base and the interests of his team. So now I'm a proud fan of the LA Rams, and we've got like an exciting new head coach and an exciting new system, and I'm just looking forward to the rest of this season.
Yeah, I mean, I started trying to get into the Rams last year when they came back to LA. I mean, I don't really remember them. I'm not old enough to remember them from when they were here before. But they were kind of a dud last year. I don't know. I mean, they started kind of all right. They were 4-4. They squeaked out some close games, and then they just fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, Jeff Fisher is very similar to Lane Kiffin in that somehow he continued to fail and yet would continue to get given better and better jobs despite his failures. And he was, the Rams coach for a number of years. He saw them through the transition from St. Louis to LA. And you would think that being in a brand new market, he would try and recharge the team and bring a whole new energy. And it was just like, as you said, a total dud. And they kind of shat the bed out there all season. And it was a real disappointment, especially given how talented Todd Gurley is as their workhorse running back. So, the infusion of Sean McVay's energy and attitude and culture has really just revitalized the entire franchise. And it looks like a whole new team.
Now, this season, we've had a few storylines come up, a little bit of a non-sports storyline, but I think it's something that we should address here. It's Week 5 coming up, but the pre-game National Anthem has stolen headlines as our president has gotten involved with the NFL, as he's gotten involved with a lot of things lately. But what do you think about it? Do you think the national anthem is an appropriate time to be protesting social injustice, or is the president out of line here?
I think that the national anthem is, supposed to be a unifying force for all of us. And the protests that we see occurring are a demonstration of, I think, a disappointment that is felt by a lot of people in this country, because we're not necessarily embracing to the fullest extent the values that we claim to hold dear to our hearts, which are those of, all men are created equal, love thy neighbor. In my mind, this sport should be a communal experience that brings people together, and I think that it is unfortunate that the sitting president has used this opportunity to make sports a more divisive issue. I think that one of the most powerful ways that someone, as a citizen of this country, can express some sort of grievance with the system and the way that things are set up these days is to engage in a peaceful protest that makes a statement without necessarily threatening the values that our culture and our country embrace. I think that we have an opportunity to learn from this and to engage in a more balanced conversation, and I hope that people will be open to that, and instead of being quick to take it as an offense or an attack on our nation, to say, okay, like, freedom of speech is one of the pillars upon which our country was built, and what more pure way of demonstrating something than to, without even speaking in an inflammatory or volatile manner, than to just have a physical demonstration of some sort of discontent or disappointment with the national conversation when it comes to racial injustice and the way that the criminal justice system is handled. So I hope that we can move past this and not have it be such a focal point. But at the same time, I think it's really important that we open ourselves up to the idea of having a more enlightened and friendly conversation, and accept the fact that there are ideas out there counter to our own sort of familiar comfort zone. And I hope that, this will be something that we can all grow from together.
Well, let me ask you, because maybe you know better than I do, because to me it seems that this kind of started with Colin Kaepernick a while ago. Maybe I just wasn't following the story close enough. But why do you think he's still not in the league? Because now everyone's doing it. It was such a big deal when he started doing it.
I mean, I think that the first thing to recognize is the NFL is a business at the end of the day. And my opinion is, and I think it's shared by some people who have more of a public voice than I do, is that owners of NFL teams are afraid that by signing Colin Kaepernick, they will alienate some of their fan base. And I can understand the apprehension and the reluctance to sign someone to a contract that is so publicly controversial. But at the same time, he's an extremely talented individual, and I think it is unfair that he is being sort of
blackballed.
Exactly, yeah, or pushed aside
Yeah.
because an NFL owner is too afraid to deal with the backlash that would come with
It sure
signing him.
seems some teams could use him. Maybe the Dolphins, teams that looking for quarterback.
I mean,
help.
Brandon Weeden just got a job because Marcus Mariota got hurt. So if Brandon Weeden can get a job in the NFL,
Yeah.
Colin Kaepernick should most certainly have a job in the NFL.
All right, let's move on. On to more other football topics. As we all know, football is a violent sport. We were prepping for the show today, me and Durs, and we didn't know really how to broach the subject of the great amount of injuries to top players this year. Danny Trevathan's hit on Devontae Adams, taking him out, being an example. Trevathan got to stay in the game, but some punishments are quite light, like clipping the kicker. Some don't get punished at all. Is there really anything that could be done about it, or is this just the nature of the game, something that's going to be an ongoing problem forever?
I think that as training for sports becomes so much more technologically advanced, players are just going to inevitably get bigger and stronger and faster. And as they do, the collisions that they engage in are just going to be so much more forceful. I think it's inevitable. I think that as long as football is a, violent, aggressive sport, the nature of the game just sort of brings that along with it. And I hope that players, for the most part, I think they know what they're getting themselves into. But with all of the research that's becoming more well known regarding CTE and all of the head trauma that can be sustained playing football, I think that it is really an opportunity to start really focusing on player safety, despite how much Roger Goodell claims that they are, which may not be as much as he claims.
Yeah. Well, we might get to it a little while when we talk about your fantasy teams, but
Right on.
it has affected you in terms of your own league and some of the players that have already gone down.
Utter devastation.
All right. Well, let's get down to that. This is why you're here. I'm curious to actually check out how you've been getting on with your fantasy teams. Interesting, this fantasy football, as you were saying earlier, because obviously football is not all about individual stats. Sometimes you got to go away from the running game, and that might hurt the stats of a running back. But realistically, a lot of these players care more about their individual stats for contract negotiations and such. So they'll be upset when they don't get touches or get the ball thrown to them. Or in Phillip Rivers' case, he'll want to throw the ball down the field on every single possession. Regardless, it's a huge craze, this fantasy football. And when a player does pick up huge stats, he's usually helping his team. And in your case, huge bragging rights are at stake, I'm sure. First of all, how about some players that you've been really happy with? Do you have any pleasant surprises that have given you unexpected production value?
Well, I have to say, I'll start with a player that wasn't necessarily unexpected, but that I took a lot of flack for drafting. I had an opportunity to draft either AJ Green or Michael Thomas, and I went with Thomas given the fact that Drew Brees just loves to sling the rock. And as of 4 weeks into the season, AJ Green has gained a total of 5 more yards than Michael Thomas has, and they both have 2 receiving touchdowns. So as far as I'm concerned, my pick was justified at this point. A measly 0.05 extra points that I would have gained is not going to be a determining factor for me. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. I'm waiting to see if Willie Snead on the Saints manages to break out the way that I'm hoping he does, given what's expected to be an increased workload. Unfortunately, he's been nursing a little injury and should make his season debut after the bye week this week. And I have a lot of faith in Todd Gurley, actually. Speaking of the Rams.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Since we're in LA, let's talk about the Rams.
Todd Gurley's the man, and everybody was really low on him after that crappy season that he had last year.
The whole offense was just crap last year.
Yeah, you could thank Jeff Fisher.
Yeah.
I would happily look up his address and give it to you, so we could all write handwritten letters to Jeff Fisher.
Well, the passing game has really opened up the running game, it seems, for them.
Oh yeah, Goff has totally matured between his first year and his second year.
Is that just coaching, or is it just because he's had a year under his belt already?
I'd say it's a combination of the two. When I look at performance, it's a combination of talent, opportunity, and the system that you're in. So if his talent level's increasing, and now he's got Todd Gurley running in the backfield, chalking up major gains every week, his job becomes a lot easier because he's just got to get the weapons that he has at his disposal involved in the game. And fortunately, this season we got a hot new rookie in Cooper Kupp, and we got Sammy Watkins from the Buffalo Bills, who I'm hoping is really going to have a breakout second half of the season.
So you're liking Todd Gurley for their matchup against the Seahawks this week?
Yeah,
big interdivision matchup, by the way. 3-1 Rams, big surprise so far. Pretty big surprise. I mean, after the anemic offense they had last year, they lead the division. So this is a big game against the Seahawks.
It absolutely is, and I think that the Seahawks have this sort of reputation for being an unstoppable force of a defense, but this year they're ranked in the bottom 5 in rushing yards allowed. So I think that they're more porous than they normally are, and I foresee a big game out of Gurley. I think that he's really hitting his stride, and the offense is actually getting him involved in the passing game, which has been like a huge bump for him. That wasn't something that he specialized in before. So yeah, I think the Rams should shred the Seahawks this weekend, and I'm really excited to watch the game.
Well, that would really be a statement for them to grab this division by the throat. If they go 4-1 and put the Seahawks down.
I mean, you heard it here first. They're winning that division, and they're making the playoffs.
Okay.
You heard it here first.
Guru Durs. All right, well, let's move on. How about some disappointments? Players that you were sure you would get some production out of and instead are just killing you.
Well, I made the mistake of drafting Bilal Powell for the Jets.
Okay.
The Jets are a tanking team, and he has ended up sharing carries with not only Matt Forte, but now Elijah McGuire's getting in the mix. And he did have a big game last week, but his 75-yard touchdown came on a play where he just tripped over his own feet at the line of scrimmage, fell down, nobody touched him, everybody else stopped playing, and then he just got up and ran into the end zone.
Yeah.
And so I consider that kind of a fluke.
Yeah.
I can see why a lot of people would be sort of like getting excited and thinking that, oh, all of a sudden he's going to be this, fantasy reliable producer that everyone hoped he would be. But
if you didn't watch the game, that it could sure seem that way.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, a lot of fantasy players don't watch the games. All they're looking at all day is their phones and their scores, like going up point by point. And getting a feel for the game flow, I feel, is one of the most helpful things that you can do as far as a fantasy owner, is actually paying attention to the games and looking at who's getting involved at what stage of the game, because you always want to have a player on your team who's an integral part of the offense from the first snap, versus a guy who's only going to be getting looks and touches once they're in garbage time and their team is down 20 points in the third quarter. So yeah, situationally speaking, Bilal Powell, he had all the sort of makings of someone who might have an explosive season, but it's been nothing but a disappointment. I actually ended up dropping him in one of my leagues after I drafted him in the 5th round. So.
Well, what about this week? Are you all ready with your teams? Do you have any faith in certain players to come through for you?
Absolutely.
Other than Todd Gurley?
I've got all 3 teams squared away. Unfortunately, I'm really hurting in one league because I lost David Johnson for 8 to 10 weeks, week 1 with a wrist injury, and Allen Robinson once again went down for the season with a torn ACL. So with that team, I'm severely depleted and struggling to put together the semblance of a reliable fantasy team. But you just got to be really aggressive on the waiver wire and look at which guys are going to get possibly more opportunity at which times. So
who have you picked up this week for the emergency scramble that is?
So a couple of big injuries happened last week. Dalvin Cook tore his ACL. He was the starting running back and a rookie for the Minnesota Vikings, and he looked fantastic. And unfortunately, he just cut too hard at the wrong moment, and his ACL just snapped. So now Latavius Murray is one of the running backs that people were just like harping over this week, who I think is not going to be the most valuable pickup that you could find, because he's had his chances in the NFL before, and their offensive line is, I would say, run of the mill at best. So I think people are getting a little too excited about Latavius Murray. But one running back that's kind of coming out of the shadows is Wayne Gallman on the Giants, because the Giants have just had a sort of shifting of the guard, if you will, as a starting running back for the past about 5 seasons. And every year it kind of looks like somebody's poking their head out and they're going to take the lead role. But this year I'm pretty convinced that Wayne Gallman looks like the guy that could end up securing that starting stud running back role for the Giants by the end of the season.
You think they'll be in the race enough for him to put up enough stats to be useful?
That is a major problem. You make a great point. The Giants are pretty trash this season.
They're 1-3, right?
Yeah, they are pretty trash.
Well, they lost their first 3. The third one was a close loss to the Redskins. That was tragic for them. They lose on a 60-plus yard field goal at the last second. First 2 games they didn't have Odell Beckham Jr. I don't know if they're completely out of it. No NFL team has made the playoffs starting 0-3. They could make a run and at least get close. But if they start falling back, some of these teams, like you say, go into tanking mode, but I don't know if we're going to get there with the Giants yet. If you watched my show a couple weeks ago, I wrote them off. But they've been fighting back. They look like they're not giving up.
When I see their head coach on TV, he just has this look of dumbfounded confusion on his face all the time. And when I see a man like that, I do not attribute that look with the look of success.
Okay.
So I do not have the most faith in the Giants this season.
All right. Well, Guru Durs, I'm glad we finally got to do this. We've been talking about doing this for a while. It was a pleasure. I hope we get another chance to do this again before the season runs out.
Absolutely. It's been awesome to be here, and it'd be great to be back sometime.
All right. Well, that is all for this edition of Sports Break. Till the next time.